Borderline personality disorder is a well-known psychological condition, but one that is often misunderstood. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some of the features and characteristics of borderline personality disorder. Hi everyone. In today's video, we're going to be talking about borderline personality disorder, or BPD, which is a common psychological condition with up to 6% of the population having borderline personality disorder or borderline personality traits at some point in their life. But despite it being quite a common condition, it's often mischaracterized and misunderstood. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about 9 characteristic features of borderline personality disorder and how they come together for a diagnosis of BPD. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute or replacement for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. Now, with those things out of the way, let's start talking about borderline personality disorder, which is a psychological condition that is often depicted in the media. And usually when it's depicted in the media, it presents a person with BPD as being out of control or crazy or emotionally unstable. One of the most popular depictions of borderline personality disorder in a movie was the Glenn Close character in the 1987 film Fatal Attraction. So despite it being commonly portrayed in the media, the thing is that often these media depictions tend to be over-the-top caricatures of what borderline personality disorder is actually like. And so today's video is trying to give you a better sense of what BPD actually looks like as opposed to some of these over-the-top depictions that you might have seen in movies or other media. Now, the thing with borderline personality disorder is that, like all personality disorders, it usually begins by early adulthood, and it tends to exist in a variety of contexts. So it doesn't tend to relate to a singular relationship. It tends to exist or present itself across a multitude of relationships in a person's life. So with those things in mind, and those are sort of characteristics of all personality disorders, I want to talk about some of the common symptoms or characteristics of BPD. So the first of which is that for a person with borderline personality disorder, they often have this frantic effort or frantic desires to avoid real or imagined abandonment. So for someone with borderline personality disorder, they tend to be highly sensitive to what's happening around them and any small signs of separation or rejection from another person. So at its core, someone with borderline personality disorder usually has high levels of intense abandonment fears. And they can often respond with excessive anger when faced with even seemingly minor slights. So someone's a few minutes late for a meeting, or a friend cancels a lunch date, or their romantic partner doesn't return a text message right away. So these seemingly minor slights can be taken as signs of abandonment for a person with borderline personality disorder. And these signs of abandonment imply that the person is bad. And often these abandonment fears are related with this deep concern or this terror or intolerance of being alone. Now, what can often happen in response to these fears of being alone is that the person with borderline personality disorder can engage in frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. And this can lead to some impulsive actions like self-mutilation or suicidal behaviors, which I'll discuss in more detail in one of the later symptoms. Another characteristic of borderline personality disorder is that people with borderline personality disorder often have a pattern of really unstable and intense relationships, friendships, but also romantic relationships. And what can often happen is when a person with borderline personality disorder initially meets someone, they may idealize potential friends or romantic partners, and they accelerate the relationship really quickly, sharing really deep, intimate details early on in the relationship, which tends to be inappropriate. It's sort of, you just meet a person, you start talking about all of these deep, personal, intimate details, which then the other person will respond with a sense of, whoa, let's slow down a little bit. And what that can then do is cause the person with borderline personality disorder to feel like the other person is rejecting them. And so they can go from really quickly idealizing another person to devaluing the other person when they perceive that the other person doesn't care enough or isn't giving enough back in the relationship or isn't sharing the same level of intimacy so quickly as they are. And so this can lead to really dramatic shifts in how they view the other person. So I refer to it as the person's either at their knees or at their throat. So at their knees, when they're kind of idealizing the person, putting them up on this pedestal, this is the most wonderful person, this is the person I'm going to marry, I feel super connected to this person, to shortly thereafter being, I hate this person, you're ruining my life, when they feel the sense that the other person is putting up some barriers or withdrawing or potentially abandoning them. Another characteristic of borderline personality disorder is a persistently unstable self-image or an unstable sense of who they are. So this can take the form of a person really shifting their goals, their values, or their career aspirations really quickly. So a person with borderline personality disorder can have sudden changes in terms of their values, their belief systems, the types of friends that they hang out with, their own personal identity, their sexual identity. And so you can see this kind of fluidity in terms of how they view themselves, how they understand themselves, how they perceive themselves. And so the self-image is really fragile, really unstable, and fluctuates a lot. But at the core of it, for a person with borderline personality disorder, they usually have a self-image that's based on this assumption that they're bad or evil. And so that's why they constantly fear that they're going to be rejected or someone's going to turn away from them, because once they get to know them, then they're going to see how bad or unlovable they are. But this self-image can also be rooted in a sense that a person doesn't have, a person may not really have a sense that they even exist at all. Like this, kind of like this lack of sense of existence or even being present in the world. And this usually occurs when the person feels a lack of meaningful relationships or nurturing or support from others. It's kind of like this, I don't really have a self-identity because I don't really feel like I'm actually existing in the world because I'm lacking sort of connection or relationship with others. Another characteristic of borderline personality disorder is the person can often engage in impulsive behaviors and have this impulsivity in areas that have the risk to be really self-damaging or harmful. So things like excessive gambling or impulsive gambling, spending money irresponsibly, going on wild buying sprees and spending money and going into debt. Binge eating behavior can often occur. Substance abuse is either alcohol or drugs, so it's not uncommon to see a person with borderline personality disorder often have a coexisting drug or alcohol problem. A person with borderline personality disorder can engage in unsafe sexual practices, kind of relating back to that point I was making earlier on, where they feel this intense connection with a person right away, and so they may meet someone and have unprotected sex really quickly, like within hours or days of meeting this person, even though they don't really know anything about the person. So this impulsivity in terms of sexual behavior. They can also drive recklessly or dangerously. It's almost like these impulsive behaviors. One of the key threads that kind of ties them all together is that they're associated with immediate feelings of pleasure or enjoyment. It's like the person is getting a sense of immediate satisfaction and immediate enjoyment and pleasure, but that these behaviors are also associated with potential for significant medium-term but also long-term harm. So at its core, this characteristic is that the person is seeking pleasure and not really considering any of the consequences of their actions. And again, part of this is often related to that feeling, that sense of lack of self, or that instability of self, and feeling an emptiness that a person with borderline personality disorder often feels. I'll talk about that emptiness in a second. What can often occur in BPD as well is recurrent suicidal behaviors, gestures, threats. So either repeated or recurrent suicide attempts, or when I say suicide gestures, what that means is something like, I know my partner is going to be home in 5 minutes, so I take a whole bunch of pills so that they'll find me. And so it's not really an attempt to kill myself, but it's a suicidal gesture. Threats of, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to, I can't take this anymore, and telling people that I'm going to engage in a suicidal act. It can also take the form of self-mutilating behaviors, so things like cutting or burning. Now, this recurrent suicidality or self-harm behavior, it's often one of the main reasons that individuals with borderline personality disorder present for help in the healthcare system. So a person engages in a suicide attempt and they're taken to hospital, and it's at the hospital that they start to get identified as having borderline personality disorder and start to get some help from that point. So these self-destructive behaviors, this suicidal ideation, the self-harming behavior, it is usually triggered by, again, that fear of abandonment or threats of separation or rejection in relationships. And if you think about this, this actually makes sense. So if I fear that a romantic partner is going to leave me or is rejecting me or is going to abandon me, and I engage in a suicidal gesture or suicidal behavior or self-harming behavior, well, for most people, they'll want to help me, and so they'll come to me when I'm engaging in these behaviors to make sure that I'm okay, that they'll want to help me. And so again, these behaviors are designed to try and keep people close, to try and keep people from leaving me or abandoning me. So it really does come back to that intense fear of being rejected or being alone. Now, another characteristic of borderline personality disorder is severe emotional instability and this kind of intense reactivity of mood. So for someone with BPD, they can experience really intense feelings of depression, irritability, or intense anxiety that comes on really quickly, but doesn't last more than a few hours or a few days. So it's different than a mood disorder. It's different than an anxiety disorder, which tend to have these periods of low mood or periods of anxiety last for prolonged periods of time. In BPD, the periods of low mood or anxiety tend to be short-lived, come on really quickly, and go away really quickly. And the periods of low mood are usually disrupted by anger, panic, or despair. And once again, these episodes of emotional instability usually occur in response to interpersonal stressors, interpersonal conflict, a fight with a partner, a fight with a friend, a disagreement or an argument with a coworker. So again, that interpersonal stress or a fear of rejection or abandonment, it can lead to this emotional instability and these seemingly wild fluctuations in mood or how a person's feeling. Another characteristic of borderline personality disorder is that a person with BPD often can feel chronic feelings of emptiness. So it's not uncommon for someone with BPD to feel easily bored and constantly seeking something to do. It's almost like there's this hole or this emptiness inside of them that they're seeking to fill with something. And that can relate to those symptoms that I was talking about earlier in terms of that impulsivity, in terms of these behaviors and activities that have immediate short-term sort of pleasure seeking, but high risk of harm later. Oftentimes this is about filling that emptiness or that void inside the person. One of the more commonly thought of symptoms of BPD is intense anger or difficulty controlling their anger. So this can come out in various forms. Things like extreme sarcasm, kind of like that mean sarcasm, or bitterness, or verbal outbursts like yelling or shouting at someone. And again, this usually seen in the context of a friend or an intimate partner being viewed as neglectful or withholding love or affection, or being uncaring, or again, that sense of abandonment. And so in response to that sense of neglect or abandonment, the person with borderline personality disorder can often lose their temper, be very bitter, hold grudges, verbal outbursts, yelling, screaming, can also take the form of physical aggression in terms of physical fights or physical violence. And what can happen with these angry outbursts is that they're then followed by periods of shame and guilt for the person with borderline personality disorder. So they lash out, they scream, or they yell, or they may hit their partner, and then feel terrible about it afterwards. And that contributes to that feeling that they're bad or evil, and it can contribute to their terror of being left alone, or that their partner might sort of leave them because they were so mean or aggressive with them. And so you can see it becomes this really negative cycle where some of these symptoms fuel into other symptoms and just make the situation so much worse for the person with borderline personality disorder. And finally, the last common symptom in borderline personality disorder is that during periods of extreme stress, people with borderline personality disorder can experience brief periods of paranoia, almost like delusional paranoia, or dissociative symptoms, things like depersonalization, which is this sense of feeling outside of their body, like they're disconnected from themselves or their body. And this can be one of the reasons that they engage in self-mutilating behavior like cutting or burning, because it reconnects them with their body. The pain from the self-mutilation brings them back into their body, into feeling like they're in themselves. Now, these dissociative symptoms tend to be brief in borderline personality disorder. They're not long-lasting, so they can last a few minutes or hours, but they don't last for extended periods of time beyond that. And once again, this dissociative symptoms usually occur in response to real or imagined abandonment. So you can see a recurring pattern with a lot of these symptoms is that, excuse me, whenever the person with borderline personality disorder perceives that someone they care about or someone in their life is pulling away from them or rejecting them or abandoning them, that's when these symptoms really sort of flare up or come out. So these are kind of the 9 common symptoms and characteristics of borderline personality disorder. But one of the problems I will often see with lay people, but also mental health professionals, is that they'll too often, too quickly throw out a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and it's usually associated with they've identified 1 or 2 of these symptoms and say, well, okay, see, that's indicative of borderline personality disorder. So if the person has kind of intense or volatile relationships, okay, it must be borderline personality disorder. Or if the person engages in cutting behavior, oh, see, it must be borderline personality disorder. But that actually misses the point. Borderline personality disorder, it's not characterized by just having 1 or 2 of these symptoms. For a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, a person has to have at least 5 of these symptoms. And once again, these symptoms had to have occurred or had to have been present since early adulthood. So it's not like they can just start later in life. That most often and most commonly are seen in early adulthood and tend to be this pervasive symptoms that affect a range of relationships and a range of contexts. It's not just, I had one really volatile relationship that sort of mood was up and down and things were kind of really unstable. That's not enough for a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. It's got to be at least 5 of these symptoms, kind of a pervasive pattern throughout life, and it's got to affect a number of different contexts. So that's one of the nuances that I think gets missed a lot with BPD, and that people often just focus on 1 or 2 of these cardinal symptoms and say, see, that person has borderline personality disorder. Now, so those are the symptoms. What I wanted to do is finish off by talking about some of the common outcomes or the common results of borderline personality disorder, how borderline personality disorder affects a person's life, or the ways in which it can interfere or cause limitations in a person's life. Now, one that you probably are already aware of, given some of the symptoms that we talked about, is that it can lead to real significant difficulties with close or intimate relationships or friendships. It's not uncommon for a person with borderline personality disorder to have real challenges and a lot of interpersonal conflict and a lot of stress in their life resulting from interpersonal conflicts. A person with borderline personality disorder can often have this pattern of almost undermining themselves the moment the goal is almost realized. So they have this long-term goal that they're working toward, and just as they're about to get to the end line, they undermine it. So things like dropping out of school just before they graduate, or destroying a good relationship once it becomes clear that the relationship is healthy and can last. It's almost like this self-destructive behavior, and it can be extremely frustrating and extremely upsetting for the person with borderline personality disorder, but also for other people in their life who care about them and who can't understand why is it that it's almost like the person sabotaging themselves, and why can't they do these things that helps them or achieve the goals, and why do they stop right before that goal has been achieved? One of the interesting things about borderline personality disorder is that often people with borderline personality disorder can feel more secure in their relationships with pets or inanimate objects or inanimate belongings, and they can feel more secure in the relationships with them versus interpersonal relationships. Now, I think a big part of that has to do with the fact that it's unlikely that a pet is going to reject them. It's unlikely that they're going to be rejected by an inanimate object. So again, it goes back to that underlying fear and terror of being rejected and alone. And so it makes sense then why a person might feel more connected with a pet, their dog or their cat, than they do with other people. And finally, for people with borderline personality disorder, it's not uncommon that they experience problems with work, recurrent job loss. A big part of this has to do with that interpersonal conflict. So conflict getting along with coworkers, conflict getting along with customers, and leading to them getting fired or job loss. It can interrupt education, so they can drop out of school and sort of restart again and then drop out. And it can lead to separation or divorce. So borderline personality disorder can be a really interfering and really challenging condition for the individual with borderline personality disorder, but also the people who are close to that person. So I hope this gives you a little bit of a better sense of what borderline personality disorder is, what it looks like, and a little bit of a different sense of it outside of the caricatures that are often portrayed in the media. I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions about this, so please leave me some comments in the comments section down below. If you've been enjoying my videos and would like to see more, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and you'll be alerted every week when I post a new video. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.